Welcome back to the Tell Them You Mean Business podcast. And as I routinely say, I am extremely excited for my guest here today, Scott Abrams. And why am I so excited? Because the guests that we get on this podcast are doing amazing things and they're great people. So how can you not be excited about having someone like Scott here today? Scott is the Wisconsin State Crime Stoppers president and treasurer. Scott, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be here, Jason. Thanks, man.
So tell our listeners how you got involved in Crime Stoppers. I know you've been involved for over 40 years. You don't look anywhere near old enough, and I know this is a podcast, so people aren't going to see it, but you don't look anywhere near old enough to be involved in this for 40 years. But tell us how you got involved.
That's kind and funny, but yes, 40 years, 1982, I started in Crime Stoppers, and I got involved because I became part of an organization's management team, a hospital system in Peoria, Illinois. And they said, well, you need to get involved in some community events. I said, okay. And I had no idea what to get involved in. There was an article in the paper that says, new organization starting a Crime Stoppers program in Peoria, Illinois. I thought, okay, well, that sounds good. Yeah, I could get involved in that. And so I sent in my resume and an application form and sent it off. And I waited about a month and I didn't hear anything. And so another month goes by, nothing. I started to give up on the idea, well, maybe they had enough board members and they're going and they're doing well. After the fourth month, they finally called back. Fifth or sixth month, they called back. And they said, well, are you interested in joining Crime Stoppers? Well, yeah. Well, come to a board meeting. We'll see if there's a match. And so I went to the board meeting. I'm thinking, got to be a well-oiled machine. They're up and running, going really well. I got there, and the first thing they do is announce, well, we're going to pay some rewards this month for solved crimes that tips have come in on. And we have about $3,000 in rewards. However, we only have about $2,000 in their checking account.
So they don't even have enough money at the initial
meeting. Don't have enough money, and so they go around the table. They pass the hat, okay? Now, I haven't been approved as a board member yet, but I'm in for not like 50. Well, they didn't get enough the first time around, so they sent the hat around the second time. And now I'm in for like $100 into the organization that I haven't even joined yet.
That's funny.
And I went to the president afterwards, and he was a vice president of communications at the local TV station. I said, why did it take so long to call back? He said, well, we didn't know why you wanted to join. We didn't know what your ulterior motive was. We did a background check on you, everything, and a credit background. You just wanted to join. I said, well, that was the purpose. He says, no one in Peoria ever joins anything on a voluntary basis.
That's funny.
And so that's how I became involved. And less than a year later, I was made president of that organization to help lead that forward from that financial situation.
And if we look back that 40 years ago, it really wasn't a situation where there was some big crime event in Peoria or something had happened earlier in life that you were passionate about this kind of a thing. You just happened to see it in the newspaper and thought this is something I could maybe get involved in and make a difference. And then who would have imagined that's 40 years have gone by and look at all you've done. So
40 years and 400 programs around the United States now almost. And at that time, Crime Stoppers itself started in 1976. So it was still relatively new in 1982.
When you started with Crime Stoppers in Peoria, how many other Crime Stopper organizations were in the United States at that time?
It's probably about 100 or so. It really started in Texas and in New Mexico, and they had the biggest population of Crime Stopper programs at that time. But then it grew throughout the United States. They started having conferences, and people started learning more about it and how they could bring it to their community. And so that's what sort of spurned Crime Stoppers. I'll talk about the history if you want as well.
I will in one sec, but I just want to ask one last question about Peoria. Was there something that happened in Peoria that caused people to say, hey, let's put together a Crime Stoppers? Do you know how it even started in the organization that you were in?
It was a genesis of that vice president of communications from that TV station had heard about it, and he wanted to do something for the community. And so he heard other communities that were doing it, and so he brought it to the area. He had to talk with the police chief first of Peoria, get his agreement on it that we could move forward with this, and then putting the group of citizens together to form the organization, because it's all citizen, community, volunteer board members that run these organizations.
Okay, so let's now talk about the history of Crime Stoppers, why it got started, where it got started, and tell our listeners about that.
Sure. I'd be glad to. It's an interesting story. Started in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We call him now the father of Crime Stoppers, Greg McAleese. He was a detective. It was an unfortunate incident where he was a college student working in an all-night convenience store. Somebody came in, robbed him, shot him, killed him on site. Got away, and no clues. Not at all. So Greg McAleese was the chief detective on that particular case. He came in and started doing the usual police work and asking the community, house to house, did you see anything? Did you hear anything? And came up nothing. After 2 or 3 weeks, they were right back where they started again. And as I know it, and I know Greg as a friend now, he's told me this story as well. Him and his wife were sitting down for dinner, and he's just shaking his head, didn't know what was going on, how to solve this crime. And she goes, they started talking about, well, what if we did a reenactment of that? What if we try to have put people in the situation where they were at that particular point in time and put a reenactment together? And so they put a reenactment together with a TV crew, came in and recorded that and kind of put together what they thought would be it. And then they thought about, well, how about if people just call in with their information? At that time, it wasn't anonymous. It was coming to the police department. But they said, yeah, that's a good idea. So they set up a special phone number for that particular case.
Okay.
And so they put the reenactment together. And within 1 hour of doing that reenactment on the news station, they got a phone call. But it wasn't about that case. It was about another homicide that someone had heard about. And they said, well, how about this information for this homicide? They solved another homicide before they even solved this one. But then several hours later, people started calling in. And as I understand it, someone said, well, I was in that area. I saw a white car drive by really fast at that point in time. And the last 3 digits of the license plate number were XYZ, let's say. And then they started getting other calls that pieced it all together. And then eventually they were able to go and find that car in front of an apartment building where the person that had perpetrated the crime was staying. And they solved that crime just based on that.
And back when that started, it wasn't really about the money then. It wasn't about giving money. How did then Crime Stoppers change and then understand, hey, we need some anonymity here? And because people are afraid. Obviously, if someone commits a murder and somebody else knows about it, they may be afraid to put their name out there because they're afraid they could then get murdered. So then how does it develop from that into a situation, which is really, it's a blessing as I think about Crime Stoppers. And I had the pleasure to be involved in a press conference with you recently, and it was just terrible. And for me out there thinking that you actually have to give money to try to solve crimes, it's a blessing and a curse.
Yes,
it's sad that you have to do that, but then it's amazing that we can do that because then people have the anonymity and you've solved. The number of crimes that Crime Stoppers has solved is over 800,000.
We've actually captured 812,000 bad guys. We've solved over 1.2 million crimes since 1976 through Crime Stoppers.
That is wild. You should be so proud of responding to an ad in a newspaper, and then to think what you've done in 40 years it's really inspiring to me. And again, that's why I get so excited about this podcast, because without it, you wouldn't get the opportunity. Right. If I wouldn't have gone to that press conference and had the ability to meet you and spend a few minutes with you, and I do want to give a shout out to my partner, Mike Hupy, because he's actually the president of the Milwaukee branch of Crime Stoppers, and he himself personally has put up a lot of money to help solve individual crimes with rewards. And I know the firm is a big sponsor of Crime Stoppers as well. But it's just crazy what you have done. So I stop myself from letting you answer the question.
That's okay.
How did Crime Stoppers then go into this situation of understanding, hey, we need anonymity here, and with money we can help solve all these crimes?
And Greg took that whole solving of that crime to the next level. Then he thought of and worked with his department of how could we do a better job in our community in solving crimes with the community help. Really, if you want to think of it as sort of the start of the community policing activities that departments did. And so he developed this program in his mind and put it together, and then started calling in other people to help him with this process. And so they developed the first one in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with the Crime Stoppers name. And then from there, it kind of spurred off. He developed that system, put some policies and procedures together, started as a nonprofit organization, raised funds to pay then the rewards that they thought were necessary to stimulate people's mind and interest to solving crimes as well. Again, people doing their civic responsibility, but maybe getting a reward for it as well, but keeping them anonymous, and that's the big part of it. He then later went to Texas. Texas has the biggest state has a number of organizations in it. They've got a state organization by far that outpaces any others other than Florida in the United States as far as how they
cultivate and reward and grant funds to these Crime Stopper programs through the state process. But that was the genesis, was Albuquerque, New Mexico.
So fast forward now to 2022, how many different Crime Stopper organizations are there in the United States?
Based on the information we have, and they're not all members of the organization. I'm also past chairman of Crime Stoppers USA, the national organization that oversees about 400 Crime Stopper programs that we know about.
Okay.
But there's when I go to the IRS publications and look at Crime Stoppers or Crime Solvers, there's a number of different names that they use. There's probably over 500 programs in the United States.
Crazy.
There's probably over 1,500. I'm also on the international board of directors for Crime Stoppers International, and they oversee about 1,500 different programs throughout the world. That this is now proliferated in that fashion.
And how has your role changed over the last 40 years? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Again, started locally, and we wanted to just be the best program in Peoria, Illinois. And we were rated as one of the highest rated programs in the country at that time. But then I went on, I became involved in state Crime Stoppers organizations. And again, what we do is we network, we communicate. We don't solve crimes at the state level, but we help cultivate the programs that are coming in, starting a new program, for example, and then how do they mature and how do they do the best job possible, giving them ideas. What's best about Crime Stoppers, we're a corporation, but there's no real proprietary information. We get together in group meetings and we just share information back and forth about the best ideas or what didn't work well. What do you want to avoid? And so you share that information back and forth. And the programs, you just see the faces, just smiles on their faces when they say, oh, you did that? You tried that and it worked? We'll have to take that back. And so that's what's good about the state and national organizations is we share that information back and forth through communication, networking, and our training conference that we have. And you say, what has my growth been in the 40 years? I'm an advisor for Crime Stoppers USA. I train nationally and internationally at a lot of our conferences in finance, organizational development, fundraising, strategic planning, organizational development, all those activities. And I train those activities throughout the country now.
It's come a long way from passing a hat at a board meeting.
Yeah, it has. It certainly has.
Let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what happens. Guaranteeing anonymity. How do you guarantee to people that are involved, that call in the tips, that ultimately solve the crimes and they get their award? Walk us through that process, how their anonymity is guaranteed. And because, for you and I, we probably can't even imagine some of the stuff, or you probably can because of all the stuff you've learned while involved in Crime Stoppers. But if you're in the inner cities where a lot of this really bad stuff is happening, you and I don't have to worry about that on a day-to-day basis, that if we try to do what's right in our community, that we're worried that someone may come to our front door and shoot us for that. But that's a real worry for people that are in some of these situations. So walk us through that process and show us how Crime Stoppers obviously has done it well, been so successful, and let us in on your secrets.
Sure. Well, you mentioned it earlier. There's the fear of reprisal is probably the biggest fear of all. People coming back to their house if they shared information and they know that police are going to come to your front door. They know what happened, and so that's a big driver of fear. And we want to take that apathy out of the situation, and so that's why Crime Stoppers really works well. You talk about the guarantee of anonymity. We call it the promise of anonymity. We can't guarantee anything, but we have state laws that will help us keep tips anonymous. So we can't be called into court to provide anonymous tip information. If we were, there's nothing on the tip information sheet that's going to help. Someone called in about someone that lives at 499 South Street, and we think they're selling drugs or something. That's all they're going to find on a tip sheet. So there's nothing that could tie them to it. How else do we protect that anonymity? There's no caller ID in our phones. It's a separate phone line. It's not part of the police department's phone system. It's a separate phone line, and that's how we take those calls. We also have a call center helping us take those calls because some people, as we know in our community, speak Spanish or they speak Hmong. We have a call center that's located in Houston, Texas, that has all those people that can answer those phone calls in different languages. So if they call in and they start speaking in Spanish, we say they say "un momento, por favor," and then they'll get somebody that can speak Spanish to them and get that information and draw that information out. So that's one way we protect the anonymity as well. we if you leave a tip online, that's all scrubbed. There's no information. We're not going to have an IP address that we can identify who it is. It's all scrubbed. So by the time that information gets to us, the call center, or us at the Crime Stoppers program, that information just comes as here's X, Y, and Z. However, we have the ability to communicate back and forth with people. One, when they call into the Crime Stoppers number, they're giving a code number. We don't want your name. We just want your information. So that code number is your identifying number going back and forth. We may give you a code number XYZ. So next time you call in and say, hey, I provided some information about a tip. My code number was XYZ. Is there any update on that? And we may say, no, not yet. Call back in another week or so. Or they may say, hey, it solved the crime. Great. You're eligible for a $500 reward. When do you want to pick it up? And then we coordinate that again, paying that reward through the code number.
And how does that work? So someone gives the tip, that the person gets arrested, then they're convicted. They're entitled to their reward, no matter what the dollar figure. How do they get their money?
Okay, so I want to make one correction to your statement there, Jason.
I'm sorry.
And we only pay the reward based on the arrest and charges. We don't wait for a conviction because sometimes the court system may say, oh, well, we'll do a plea bargain. Was that person really convicted? So that gets in a lot of gray issues. So
I apologize for that.
No, but that's a good thing because not everybody knows that. So it's based on arrest and charges.
Okay.
And so then they're eligible for that reward. They'll call back, and then we have a secret process in which that is handled. So again, they give us that code number, and then we'll give them a cash reward. No checks are involved. It's all cash rewards.
Awesome. Any certain circumstance or case or something that sticks with you, anything you were involved of in the last 40 years, that something was solved, or anything that sticks in your mind as kind of a game-changing event or something along those lines?
Well, actually, several come to mind. The first one that comes to mind is, again, came back from Peoria. And back when we were starting out, I participated in some of the reenactments that we did for the TV stations. But when I mention we're doing reenactments and you say what unusual has happened in that period of time, again, I was very involved in reenactments. And there was one case where it was down to housing projects. And there was a gas meter guy that had gone in and had been robbed by gunpoint. And so they asked me to do that reenactment. I was going to be the meter guy, the gas meter guy. And I went into the neighborhood. And it was a last minute thing because the other actor had fallen by the wayside. And then the coordinator called me and says, could you fill in quickly? Sure. So I went down to the project and I met the other actor, a student that he had picked up at the college, and he was going to be the bad guy. And so we, without rehearsal or anything, we just went out, and I went up to the door, knocked on the door, and said, gas company, and all of a sudden, okay, don't turn around. Give me your wallet, and don't turn around. Wait for like 2 minutes. I said, okay. So that was how we didn't do a rehearsal on this. And so then I waited and waited. I pulled out my wallet, gave it to the guy, and all I hear running away. Okay. And so I'm thinking the cameras must have stopped by then. I'm watching this guy, and he keeps running, and he goes around down the block, and then he goes around the block, and he's gone.
You were really robbed?
And I go, Jay, the coordinator, I said, what, do you know this kid? He says, no, I just picked him up at the college. And then like 5 minutes later, he came back. We said, where did you go? He says, well, I want to make it as realistic as possible. And I hadn't taken anything out of my wallet. He had my wallet, all my cash and credit cards in it.
Thank God. I thought you were really robbed.
I did. I didn't. We didn't know.
Oh, that is so funny. Well, you should be so proud of everything you have done and the differences you have made throughout the whole United States in the last 40 years. It is so inspiring to think of over 800,000 people and all the great work that people at Crime Stoppers do. If someone wants to learn more about Crime Stoppers, wants to give a tip, wants to do anything related to Crime Stoppers, please tell us how someone can learn more, give a tip, give all the information that the listeners may want to know to learn more.
Very good point. We have a phone number. Again, that number is 1-414-224-TIPS, TIPS, or 8477. That will connect you with our call center, and you can leave the information. We also have to download the P3 Tips app that we have. So it's P3 Tips app. Just do a download on your smartphone for that, and you can leave information, videos, photos if you're able to take them as well, and they can be processed right through that tip application as well. We also have a brand new feature, and this is across the country that I've helped implement through Crime Stoppers USA. Just dial **tips, TIPS, anywhere in the country. And what you'll do is you'll get someone on the phone and they'll say, what do you want to call about and where are you calling from? And if you say, even if you're in California, I want to call about a tip in Milwaukee, say Milwaukee, and you'll be connected with the Milwaukee Crime Stoppers program.
That's amazing.
And provide your information that way.
Well, I also want to give a corporate appeal. As I said earlier, my partner Mike Hupy is the president of the Milwaukee branch of Crime Stoppers. He personally has given a lot of money. The firm is a big corporate sponsor. And I want to give this appeal to the other corporate citizens, not only in Milwaukee, but in all the other communities that people may live in, and say, if we want our communities to be safer, we want our communities to be better, it's incumbent on us to start and help the process. And I know we walk the walk and talk the talk. And I really want other community people and businesses and leaders to step up and do something, because, you know, by giving money to Crime Stoppers, we really have the opportunity to make our communities safer. And you've proven that, and we see it here every day.
And that's to make a difference. You talk about that. Crime Stoppers does not operate on any tax revenues at all. It's all through grants, donations, and sponsorships, such as Michael Hupy and Mike Hupy and Abrams have been very generous in those donations, and we would like to see other organizations and businesses step up as well. You mentioned Crime Stoppers USA. How many rewards have we paid out? We've paid out over $118 million in rewards.
Wow.
That's all through donations and sponsorships that those rewards are paid. The other surprising part about that statistic is only 30% of the people call back for a reward. The other 70% just wanted, like, say, anonymous, nobody to come to my house. They just want to do their civic responsibility and provide that information. So if you think about that, 3 times that amount is over $400 million, what we would have paid out in rewards if everybody had called back. People just want that outlet to provide that information to them.
You know, right now we're seeing in the news all this bad information, bad facts about crime being up all over the country. And the bottom line is, this is a way that we can all do our part and try to make our communities safer. So thank you for all you do, but I am not going to let you go until we play a game. Believe it or not, we have started on this podcast a game, and I'm going to ask you a few questions about one of our practice areas, and we're going to see how you do. It's a fun little end to the podcast. So today we are going to talk about, or ask you some questions about slip and falls and educate our listeners. And we're going to play 3 true or false questions, and you'll have 60 seconds. It never takes that long to answer all 3 of the questions. So here we go. Question number 1. True or false? Summer is considered the peak slip and fall season.
False.
That actually is true. I thought it was false as well, because you think
we live in Wisconsin. We live in Wisconsin.
With the snow and ice and everything, but it actually is true because more people are out and about, and in the summer they're falling from ladders, skateboarding, sports-related things, being out in water areas. So surprisingly, that answer is true. Okay, question number 2. True or false? Supermarkets, escalators, and sidewalks are 3 of the most common places that slip and fall accidents occur.
True.
You're right. That is true. And the last question, true or false? In a slip and fall case, the only evidence you can have is a video of the accident.
No, that's false.
You're right. I mean, obviously you can have pictures, testimony of witnesses, and so forth. So again, I just want to say thank you so much, Scott, for making our communities safer, for all you do and have done for Crime Stoppers. It was an honor for me to have you on the podcast and learn more about it. So thank you so much.
And we're so appreciative of the work you and Michael do for Crime Stoppers as well. You came to the press conference and you helped us out, and thank you for all you do for the community.
It's our pleasure.